On July 8, 2023, 36 students at a school in the province of Cauca, Colombia, were playing with a Ouija board on their school grounds before their birthday, and soon after, they collectively showed strange behavior and kept hitting themselves with their hands. In response to the situation, the relevant personnel rushed to splash holy water to pray, and sent the children to the hospital for treatment. In response to this incident, the director of the Department of Education of the province of Cauca, Amarildo Correa, said that the investigation is underway, and called on parents and teachers to avoid students to play psychic games, to prevent the recurrence of similar incidents. Comprehensive media reports, the incident occurred in Timbiqui, a school. There were 36 students playing psychic version of the school, at first only some of the children out of the situation, but as time passes, more and more people appear strange behavior. Those involved described the children's behavior as difficult to explain. One looked like she was struggling, the others held her down to prevent her from harming herself, and then another did the same thing, the source said. Sources close to the case said that while waiting to be taken to the hospital, some people splashed holy water and prayed, and the children were treated for fainting, temporary blindness and anxiety, but most of them have recovered. In response to this incident, the Director of Education of the Department of Cauca, Correa, said that the investigation is underway, and called on parents and teachers to avoid students playing psychic games to prevent similar incidents from occurring again. In fact, this is not the first time that similar incidents have occurred. 28 female students from the northern Colombian province of Sucre were sent to the hospital in March of the same year after experiencing fainting spells, anxiety, and other symptoms at their school in Galeras. The students were rumored to be playing with Ouija boards, also known as Ouija boards, prior to the incident, which led to associations of evil spirits. In 2003, students from Ershui Junior High School in Zhonghua County, Taiwan, stayed at the Jianqiao Hotel in Coral Pool, Washington, the night before, and were suspected of playing with Ouija boards. Several students from Ershui Junior High School had shortness of breath and convulsions, and it seemed that they were all frightened and nervous, which is one of the phenomena that can be caused by psychological factors and physiological reactions. Doctors said that this is a case of hyperventilation, which causes spasm and inability to breathe, and the cause of the disease may be either psychological or physiological. When hyperventilation occurs, you will feel your heart beating faster, palpitations, sweating, and thus feel that you can't breathe fresh air, causing secondary respiratory salty intoxication, leading to fainting, and in severe cases, hysteria, loss of conscious function and shock. Forest Hill Outpatient Clinic also found that people playing games such as Ouija board fairy, pen fairy, money fairy, to ask the Ouija board fairy, pen fairy down to earth when the mouth to recite words, and to be closed in the room, and thus prone to blurred consciousness and shortness of breath. So Forest Hill called on students to outdoor travel, should be engaged in the proper leisure games and activities, to avoid the occurrence of after effects. Psychiatrist Joe Lixio said, religion by miracle manifestation, to help ghosts-possessed patients get clean, release the process, from the point of view of psychiatry, is the dissociation of personality, that is, the so-called hysteria. This situation may also occur in the money fairy, Ouija board fairy and other games. On December 30, 1983, Lin Yongxuan, the manager of a Huanan bank in Taipei City, suddenly disappeared the day before, and the next day the bank was robbed of more than 7 million in cash. The police found Lin Yongxuan's body in a factory in Sanzi, Taipei County, 7 months after the crime, and the culprit was Hu Guanbao, who later committed the Wuchang Elementary School kidnap case and the HSIN Kuang Group's Wu Dongyang kidnapping case. He was eventually sentenced to death. The police officers involved in the Pingdong Road branch robbery were said to have invited a Ouija board to collect clues to solve the case. There have been reports of accidents after playing with Ouija boards, including involuntary crying, depression, vomiting, hallucinations, unconsciousness or coma, and sometimes even suicides. What is Ouija board? Ouija board is a traditional mystical game that involves communicating with the spirit world through the use of circular pictures that point to letters, numbers or patterns. The game is usually played by 2 or more people, each of whom gently places a finger on the edge of the circle and asks questions or requests instructions from the spirit world. It is often necessary to remain quiet and focused on the question or request while performing the Ouija board. The picture may start to move and eventually stop on a letter or pattern, which is thought to be the answer or direction from the spirit world to the question or request. However, some people believe that Ouija boards may simply be caused by the unconscious movements of the participants and do not have a supernatural element. Throughout the world, there are instances where the dead are contacted through specific mediums or by psychics. Among them, Ouija boards, pen fairies, chopsticks fairies, silver fairies, money fairies, mirror fairies, hand fairies, guardian gods, Ouija boards, foxes and dogs, and shapeshifters are all forms of seances, a form of seance, that are carried out through the use of tools. Depending on the local culture, these activities have different names. In ancient China, this kind of activity was called mediumship/Fluanran, and was very popular among bureaucrats. The Emperor Jiajing of the Ming dynasty attached great importance to it. In the West, such instruments are called Ouija boards, also known as spirit boards, and talk boards. In Japan, they are sometimes called fox and dog. In Chinese, they are called Ouija boards, pen fairies, chopsticks fairies, and money fairies. Usually, the organizer will prepare paper or boards with writing on them, and depending on the culture, the tools used may be small plates, crystals, pens, chopsticks, coins, etc. The organizer will pray for the fairy of the dish, fairy of the pen, fairy of the chopsticks, and fairy of the money. The participants will pray for the arrival of fairies, spirits, and foxes and dogs. Depending on the situation, multiple participants will be asked not to let go of their fingers or leave their seats at will, and not to push the instruments used for questioning at will. Participants will ask questions to an invisible presence that descends on the scene, press, or hold the instrument used to ask the question, and if there is a response to the question, a small plate/crystal/pen/chopsticks prepared by the participant will be moved across the paper or text board. After asking the question, the adult must be asked to return the pattern or word, usually its temporary position, otherwise there may be unforeseen results. This activity is therefore dangerous. Because of the nature of the activity, some mental illness researchers and medical professionals believe that it is just human beings making self-suggestions to motivate the movement of the tool. However, there are also cases in which the participant suffers from depression, fear, confusion, and insanity along the way, and there are even cases in which the participant claims to have really encountered the existence of the unwanted, such as evil spirits, demons, and so on. It is also worth mentioning that people who have psychic vision or the ability to sense spirits are prone to feeling the presence of ghosts and other inhuman beings during daredevil meetings, seances, including Ouija boards and other events, and ghost storytelling. It is said that this type of activities will easily attract the attention of the ghosts in the area, which will then approach the ghost storytellers. In addition, in many daredevil meetings, seances, including Ouija boards and other activities, and ghost storytelling events, it is said that they may actually attract monsters and evil spirits that should not be attracted. It is said that in serious cases, it is necessary to call on the help of magicians, priests, exorcists, and other people who have the ability to get rid of spirits. Playing with Ouija boards and money fairies is also a way of fortune telling. In fact, Ouija boards are modified from Western Ouija boards, which are said to have a history of more than 100 years. Ouija boards first became popular in the United States in the middle of the 19th century, when the Civil War resulted in the deaths of many people, and people began to be keen on communicating with the dead. This activity, now developed into a table game, has long been recognized as psychic, communicating with the dead by moving the cards on the Ouija board. The name Ouija board trademark has an interesting origin, as some dictionaries spell it Ouija board trademark because it was a trademark registered in the United States at the end of the 19th century, and the words oui and ga stand for yes in French and German, respectively. Netflix also made a science documentary about the Ouija board. The documentary featured a paranormal researcher, Psychic Edward, who conducted an experiment with a Ouija board. 4 participants, who had never played pen fairy before, were invited to sit around the Ouija board table. Edward asked these 4 people if they believed that Ouija boards could bring in the dead. Some believed, some were skeptical, and some didn't believe in it at all. Afterwards, they all started to invoke the Ouija board together. The host asked the 4 participants to stretch out their hands and put them on a wooden board, without exerting any force, just use their fingertips to gently rest on the board without exerting any force, and at the same time, asked all of them to relax, concentrate their thoughts and call out to the spirits in their hearts. Edward lowered his head and closed his eyes, and began to ask, "Ouija board, are you there?" At the end of the questioning, the signboards under the hands of the 4 players suddenly began to move magically, sliding around on the Ouija board, and finally stopping at the word yes, which represented the answer of the pen fairy, "Yes, I'm right beside you." By this point in the game, some people were already exclaiming that it was incredible. Everyone swore that they were not manipulating or moving the board with any force, but they felt an invisible force driving the board. Then Edward asked the male participant to think of a deceased person and tell him her name was Diane, and Edward asked, "Diane, are you with us tonight?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the board began to move to a yes answer. At this point, several of the female participants were horrified, and even the atheist man's face changed dramatically. Then Edward asked, "Diane, can you tell us why you died?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the board began to move again and landed on the letters C, A, and R, in that order. Edward then asked the male participant, "Was Diane killed in a car accident?" The man nodded in the affirmative, and the atmosphere was terrifying. Everyone was basically stunned. Each participant then engaged in similar questioning and communication with a departed friend, and each answer was so accurate and magical that one had to believe they were actually contacting the spirits through this game. When all 4 participants were convinced that they were Ouija board members, the host had everyone put on a black blindfold, and then the same participants continued to play the game in the same way. What would be the result this time? After everyone put on the blindfolds and Edward asked a question, the board still moved, but it moved, and where it finally stopped, it was either the part of the table without letters or the space between the letters, and not once did it produce an answer, let alone a correct answer. It was repeated several times, several questions were asked, but no valid answers were produced. When everyone took off their blindfolds and waited with great expectation for Edward to announce that they could still have psychic powers even if they were blindfolded, they were greatly disappointed with the final result. Edward could only tell everyone with regret, "I am sorry, I can only say that there is no such thing as undead in tonight's game." So what invisible force is manipulating the board to move to the right place? Why is it that a miracle that happens with your eyes open doesn't happen with your eyes closed? Finally, we'll let Cohen, a neuroscientist at the University of Virginia, explain the mystery. Cohen explains that when we play games like Ouija board and pen fairy, we are manipulated by a kind of ideomotor effect, that is, our subconscious mind. When people play Ouija board, the left parietal lobe of the brain will dominate and manipulate the muscles of the hand to move, the whole process we do not even feel, that is to say, when people put their hands on the sign, when the question is asked to the relevant person, his brain knows the answer, and the ideomotor effect will manipulate his hand to move the sign to the position he wants. For example, if he knows that the answer is car, his brain will secretly manipulate his hand to move the sign to the letter C. In the process, the other participants did not exert any force and did not manipulate the sign. That's why if everyone is blindfolded and can't see the position of the letters on the Ouija board, they won't be able to move the sign to the corresponding position. If you also want to feel the action effect of the idea, you can play this game, hands together, index fingers parallel to the vertical in front of the eyes, between the index fingers of about 25 centimeters between the concrete, the body relaxed, eyes looking at the parallel index fingers, and then you will find that no matter what, your 4 fingers will slowly close together, as if there is a kind of intangible magnetism in the middle of the general attraction to each other. This is the power of the action effect of the idea. In addition, some scientists who are also interested in paranormal phenomena have also studied the phenomenon of Ouija boards, and in the 1930s, the American Dr. Irving Yeager and Edmund Jacobson were the first to study the phenomenon. In the 1930s, the American physician Dr. Irving Jacobson and Dr. Edmund Jacobson asked subjects to imagine that they were lifting weights, which resulted in the production of tiny muscle signals from their biceps. This natural reaction, called imagining, usually occurs when people are not consciously aware of what they are doing, and is often used to explain why the saucer moves on its own when people play Ouija board. Later, Harvard University psychologist Daniel Wegner, who is also the author of the book Daniel Wegner, a psychologist at Harvard University, conducted an experimental study. For the first 5 minutes of the experiment, they asked one group of subjects to not visualize a white bear in their minds, while the other group continued to think of a white bear, and then for the next 5 minutes, the two groups were allowed to engage in free association. During the next 5 minutes, the subjects were allowed to engage in free association. Once they thought of a white bear, they had to ring a bell, and the researchers counted the number of times the bell was rung. The researchers counted the number of times the bell was rung. It was found that the "don't think of the white bear" group thought of the white bear much more often than the other group during the free association phase. The experiment proved that if we deliberately do not think about certain things, we are more likely to remember them, which is also known as the white bear effect. This is also known as the white bear effect. The white bear effect does not only occur in our consciousness, but also affects our actions. In this experiment, subjects were asked to hold a small pendulum made of nylon thread and 2 grams of weight, and were given 2 different task instructions: keep the pendulum still and the pendulum must not be horizontally displaced. The results showed that forcing the pendulum not to move in a certain direction had the opposite effect of making the pendulum swing more. Even though the brain repeatedly told the subject not to do it, the body moved unconsciously. When we play with Ouija boards, money fairies, or Ouija boards, we may keep thinking, relax, don't move, let the disc move by itself. But the more we think about it, the more likely we are to let our bodies move, and with the influence of our thoughts, we may unconsciously start to move the saucer. This kind of psychic game is particularly attractive to young people who want to know the future or other people's love affairs because of its mysterious nature and easy operation. However, this seemingly interesting game is actually dangerous. From a religious point of view, the so-called playing with Ouija board is actually a kind of mediumship. The main purpose of this ritual is to summon a deity to attach itself to a certain object and answer the questions of the participants by moving or writing words, and at the end of the ritual, it is necessary to give thanks to the deity and send the deity away. Therefore, from a religious point of view, people should not play with Ouija boards lightly. As the saying goes, it is easy to invite a spirit but difficult to send it away. If a person does not know how to perform rituals and invites spirits, he will not only cause trouble to the world, but also cause trouble if he does not know how to send the spirits away, and the inviter will also suffer. Generally speaking, in the process of mediumship, the medium, or the so-called medium, will sometimes appear to be a deity. Sometimes, the medium, the so-called medium, may also experience possession of the body by a deity, such as dancing, regular body movements, speech, and expressions like crying or laughing. Therefore, it is not difficult to understand that similar situations may occur when playing with Ouija boards. However, it is really dangerous for a student who has no religious experience or knowledge to experience such mysterious possession phenomena on school campus. Even from a psychological point of view, playing Ouija board is a dangerous game with fatal attraction. In this kind of game, all participants must concentrate, self-suggestion, collective hypnosis, in order to enter a kind of trance, mental state. Some people's personalities and mental characteristics can easily enter this mysterious state of mind and change their state of consciousness during similar games or rituals. In this state, one's sensory experiences, emotions, nervous and physiological reactions will be very different from the normal ones, and one will have hallucinations, for example seeing or being oppressed by ghosts, walking in heaven or hell, etc., and one's facial expressions, speech and emotions, and body movements may appear strange and difficult to understand. If one cannot get out of this state of mind, it may induce or develop into mental illness. All in all, at first glance, playing with Ouija board seems to be a harmless and exciting game. However, from both religious and psychological perspectives, it is a dangerous behavior and should not be attempted easily. If you really have a desire to divine or predict the future, there are many other less dangerous ways to do so, such as fortune telling, drawing lots, etc., so you don't need to resort to such dangerous methods. If you've played this game before, feel free to report back in the comments section.